The violet sky of Zenta 9 shimmered, with its characteristic crystalline hue, as the twin suns began their slow descent toward the horizon. Within the sleek, dome-shaped complex of Aurora Labs, the day shift was winding down, but activity continued unabated in the research wing. The air hummed with the gentle whirring of advanced machinery and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. Naira carefully adjusted her protective gloves, her slender lavender fingers moving with practiced precision. At 19 Xylar cycles, equivalent to Earth years, she was the youngest research intern at the prestigious interplanetary facility. Her silvery green eyes reflected the soft blue glow of the specimen container as she leaned forward, her delicate features tense with concentration. "Sample preparation complete, Thienvar," she announced, looking up at her mentor and fellow Xylar. Thienvar nodded approvingly, his more deeply pigmented purple skin crinkling around his eyes. "Good work. Now remember, these human Xylar tissue integration tests are extremely sensitive to contamination. Follow protocol exactly." Naira straightened, her slim frame barely reaching Thienvar's shoulder. "Of course. I've memorized all 72 steps." A hint of pride colored her voice. Only 6 months into her internship, and she had already earned enough trust to assist with the United Interplanetary Consortium's groundbreaking cross-species pharmaceutical research. As she prepared to transfer the sample to the auxiliary lab, Naira's gaze drifted across the vast research floor. Humans and Xylars worked side by side, though there remained a subtle underlying tension, cultural differences that even 2 decades of cooperation hadn't fully bridged. The humans moved with a certain efficiency, their expressions often unreadable to Xylar sensibilities. The Xylars, with their heightened emotional intelligence, often found human directness jarring. In the far corner, a group of UIC officials in crisp uniforms stood huddled around Dr. Alan Thorne, the lead researcher on the combat serum project. Their voices were hushed, but their body language suggested urgency. Dr. Thorne's tall, commanding figure gestured emphatically as he spoke, his silver-streaked dark hair catching the light. The combat serum project was officially classified as a human enhancement initiative, but rumors had spread through the Xylar research community that it was primarily designed for military applications. Most Xylars viewed genetic manipulation with deep cultural suspicion, a position that created an ongoing source of friction with their human colleagues. Naira averted her gaze when one of the officials glanced in her direction. She had learned early in her internship to focus on her own work and not draw unnecessary attention to herself. The humans were protective of their military research, and Xylars, who asked too many questions, often found themselves reassigned to less sensitive projects. With the sample container securely in her grasp, Naira headed toward the auxiliary lab. The corridor that connected the main research floor to the smaller specialized labs was unusually quiet this late in the day. Her footsteps echoed softly against the polished floor as she passed a series of unmarked doors. Storage rooms, she assumed, though she'd never had reason to enter most of them. The day had been long, and fatigue was beginning to settle into her limbs. Her throat felt parched, a common side effect of working with the dry, recycled air of the laboratory environment. She paused, considering whether to detour to the hydration station before continuing to the auxiliary lab. The decision was made for her when the sample container in her hand began to emit a soft alert tone, indicating that its temperature regulation needed adjustment. Naira quickly scanned the nearby doors, looking for somewhere to set down her equipment and address the issue. A door labeled Environmental Control stood slightly ajar, light spilling from within. Pushing it open with her shoulder, Naira stepped into what she quickly realized was not an environmental control room at all, but a secure storage facility. Shelves lined the walls, filled with labeled containers of various sizes. In the center of the room stood a sophisticated cooling unit, its digital display flashing a series of numbers. She hesitated, aware that she had inadvertently entered a restricted area. But the sample's alert tone was becoming more insistent. Moving quickly, she set the container on a nearby counter and began adjusting its settings. As she worked, her elbow knocked against a small vial, sending it tumbling to the floor. The seal cracked, releasing a fine crystalline powder that scattered across the polished surface. "No, no, no," she muttered, dropping to her knees to examine the damage. The vial had been unmarked except for a barcode and a small UIC military insignia. A sinking feeling settled in her stomach as she realized she had likely contaminated a classified substance. Working quickly, she gathered what she could of the spilled crystals, but much of it had already dissolved into the air or settled into the microscopic crevices of the floor. Panic began to rise in her chest. If she reported this immediately, it could mean the end of her internship. If she didn't report it, the consequences could be even worse. Her throat burned with thirst, intensified by her anxiety. Spotting a water dispenser in the corner of the room, Nira hurriedly filled a cup and drank deeply, hoping to clear her head and decide on the best course of action. The water tasted slightly metallic, not unusual for the filtered supply in the research facility, but as she swallowed, Nira felt an immediate tingling sensation spreading down her throat. Her heart rate suddenly accelerated, and a wave of warmth flooded through her body. Too late. She realized her mistake. The water dispenser had been positioned directly beneath the ventilation system, where the crystalline powder had dispersed. What she had just consumed wasn't pure water, but water contaminated with the unknown substance from the broken vial. The effect was almost instantaneous. Her skin flushed a deeper shade of purple, and her pupils dilated dramatically. Her breathing became rapid and shallow, and her nerve endings seemed to fire all at once, creating a cascading sensation of intense stimulation that radiated from her core to the tips of her fingers. "What's happening?" she gasped, bracing herself against the counter as her legs threatened to give way beneath her. The room began to spin, and the lights seemed to pulse in time with her racing heartbeat. With trembling hands, Nira reached for her communication device, but her coordination was already compromised. The device clattered to the floor, skidding under the cooling unit out of reach. A surge of adrenaline, or something similar in Xylar physiology, coursed through her veins. The sensation was unlike anything she had ever experienced. A combination of extreme alertness, heightened sensitivity to touch, and an overwhelming rush of endorphins that bordered on euphoria. But beneath the surface, pleasure lurked something more dangerous, a loss of control that terrified her scientifically trained mind. Whatever she had ingested was clearly interacting with her Xylar biochemistry in unpredictable ways. Using the last of her coherent thought, Nira staggered toward the door. She had to find help, had to reach Tienvar or the medical bay before the substance took full effect. But as she stepped into the corridor, the bright lights and sudden noise of a passing group of researchers sent another wave of overwhelming sensation crashing through her system. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes squeezed shut, trying desperately to maintain control as her body betrayed her. One cell at a time. "Nira!" A concerned voice penetrated the haze of her consciousness. "Are you ill?" She forced her eyes open to see a human colleague, Dr. Leon Mora, one of the few humans who had made an effort to pronounce her name correctly, looking at her with concern. "Help!" Nira managed to whisper, before her legs finally gave way, and she slid down the wall to the floor, lost in a storm of uncontrollable sensation. The last thing she heard before consciousness slipped away was Dr. Mora's urgent voice calling for emergency medical assistance, and the distant sound of an alarm beginning to wail. Chaos erupted in the corridor as Dr. Mora's call for help brought research staff running from all directions. Nira was only dimly aware of hands lifting her, of voices raised in urgent consultation, of the harsh glare of examination lights as she was rushed to the medical bay. "Her vital signs are off the charts," someone was saying. "Heart rate triple normal baseline. Neural activity spiking across all pathways." What happened? Was she exposed to something? "Look at her pupils. Classic signs of severe stimulant overdose." Through the fog of overwhelming sensation, Nira fought to maintain a thread of consciousness. She needed to tell them about the broken vial, the contaminated water, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. Each attempt to speak sent new waves of tingling heat coursing through her body. Dr. Thorne pushed through the crowd of medical staff, his expression grim. "Everyone back. Give her air." He leaned over Nira, his experienced eyes quickly assessing her condition. "This isn't a standard reaction," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "The skin discoloration pattern is unique." He turned to Dr. Mora. "Where did you find her?" "Near storage room C, the one housing the Phase Y trial materials." A shadow passed over Dr. Thorne's face. "Clear the room," he ordered abruptly. "Everyone except essential medical personnel. Out, now." As the room emptied, Tienvar arrived, his usual composed demeanor replaced by naked concern. "What's happening to her?" he demanded, refusing to be ushered out with the others. Dr. Thorne hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "We believe she may have been exposed to an experimental compound." "What compound?" Tienvar's voice rose. "As her supervisor and the senior Xylar biochemist on staff, I have a right to know what's affecting my intern." The two researchers locked eyes in a moment of silent confrontation before Dr. Thorne relented. "We suspect it may be a diluted form of the combat serum," he said quietly. "But that's strictly confidential information. If word gets out that we've had a containment breach of military-grade materials..." Tienvar's expression hardened. "Your secrecy concerns don't interest me. What interests me is that a Xylar is suffering from exposure to a substance designed for human biochemistry. Do you even know what effect it might have on her system?" Before Dr. Thorne could respond, Nira's body arched off the examination table, a small cry escaping her lips. The monitors tracking her vital signs erupted in a cacophony of alarms. "She's going into biochemical shock," the attending physician announced. "We need to stabilize her immediately." "Standard human protocols won't work," Tienvar insisted, moving to Nira's side. "Xylar physiology processes stimulants differently. Our emotional centers are directly linked to our autonomic nervous system in ways humans aren't." Dr. Thorne's expression darkened with realization. "The combat serum is designed to enhance human aggression and survival responses. In a Xylar, it would create a feedback loop between emotional stimulation and physical response." Tienvar finished, essentially triggering an uncontrolled arousal state across all systems. As if confirming their analysis, Nira's skin began to pulse with bioluminescent patterns, a Xylar response typically associated with extreme emotional states. Her breathing came in short, desperate gasps, and her eyes, when they occasionally fluttered open, showed pupils so dilated that the silvery green of her irises was barely visible. "We need to counteract the serum," Dr. Thorne said, already moving toward the pharmaceutical storage unit. "Something to dampen the effect without sending her into complete system collapse." "Nothing in your standard inventory will work," Tienvar argued. "Xylar biochemistry requires..." "I'm aware of the differences," Dr. Thorne interrupted sharply. "I've been researching cross-species pharmaceutical compatibility for 15 years. But right now, we don't have the luxury of developing a perfect solution. We need to buy time." He returned with a vial of clear liquid. "This is a neural pathway inhibitor. It's not species-specific, but it should slow the rate at which the serum is triggering her responses." Tienvar examined the compound critically before giving a reluctant nod. "It's not ideal, but you're right. We need to stabilize her before we can treat the underlying exposure. As they administered the inhibitor, the lab's communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. A stern, female voice filled the room. Dr. Thorne, this is Major Rebecca Sloan. I've just been informed of a potential containment breach in the combat serum storage. Report immediately. Dr. Thorne's jaw tightened. Not now, he muttered, focusing on adjusting Nira's intravenous medication flow. The communication system chimed again, more insistently. Dr. Thorne, this is not a request. Security protocols have been activated. All personnel are to remain in place, pending a full investigation. Tianvar looked up sharply. Security protocols? She's a victim, not a security threat. The combat serum is classified military technology, Dr. Thorne explained grimly. Any exposure event automatically triggers containment procedures. She needs specialized medical care, not containment, Tianvar insisted. We should transfer her to the Xylar Medical Facility, in the northern quadrant. Dr. Thorne shook his head. No one leaves the facility until we determine exactly what happened, and whether there's risk of further contamination. As they argued, neither noticed that Nira's vital signs were beginning to stabilize, not because of the inhibitor, but because her Xylar physiology was adapting to the serum in unexpected ways. The initial shock was giving way to a new state, heightened awareness coupled with intense sensory sensitivity. Nira's consciousness began to resurface, though everything around her seemed distorted, as if viewed through rippling water. The voices of Dr. Thorne and Tianvar reached her as if from a great distance, their words occasionally breaking through the haze of sensation that still enveloped her. Military applications. Ethical violations. Could set back human-Xylar relations by decades. With enormous effort, Nira forced her eyes open. The overhead lights seemed unbearably bright, sending spikes of both pain and pleasure radiating through her skull. She tried to speak, but her mouth felt dry, her tongue uncooperative. Instead, she focused on moving her hand, reaching out to grasp Tianvar's arm. The simple touch sent another shockwave of sensation through her system, but she fought through it, squeezing his wrist to get his attention. Both researchers turned to her in surprise. Nira, Tianvar leaned closer. Can you understand me? She managed a slight nod, though the movement made the room spin around her. What happened? Dr. Thorne asked, his tone urgent but gentle. Can you tell us what you were exposed to? Nira swallowed hard, fighting to form words. Vial. Broke. Water. Each word was an immense effort, pushing through the overwhelming sensations still cascading through her body. Understanding dawned on Dr. Thorne's face. She broke a vial in the storage room and then drank water that was contaminated with the substance. Is that correct, Nira? Tianvar asked, his expression grave. She nodded again, then immediately regretted it as another wave of dizziness washed over her. But beneath the physical discomfort, a new feeling was emerging, a dawning anger at the realization that she had been accidentally exposed to a military compound being developed without full disclosure to the Xylar research partners. Dr. Thorne seemed to read her thoughts. The Combat Serum Project is a legitimate research initiative with proper authorization, he said defensively. The military applications are secondary to the medical benefits. Tianvar made a sound of disbelief. Is that why it was stored in an unmarked vial with only a military insignia for identification? Is that why none of the Xylar research staff were informed of its presence in our shared facility? Before Dr. Thorne could respond, the medical bay doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Major Rebecca Sloan strode in, flanked by two security officers. Her crisp UIC uniform and severe expression immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Dr. Thorne, she acknowledged with a curt nod before turning her attention to Nira. This is the exposed individual? She has a name, Tianvar said coldly. Nira, Research intern and victim of inadequate safety protocols. Major Sloan ignored the barb. What's her condition? Stabilizing, Dr. Thorne reported. We've administered a neural inhibitor to counteract the most severe effects of the serum. And the risk of contagion? Minimal to none, Dr. Thorne assured her. The serum isn't communicable. It requires direct introduction to the bloodstream or, in this case, ingestion. Major Sloan nodded, making a note on her electronic tablet. Nevertheless, standard quarantine protocols will remain in effect until we've completed a full assessment. She glanced at Tianvar. That includes restricting information about this incident. Nothing leaves this room without direct clearance from UIC command. Tianvar drew himself up to his full height, his normally gentle features hardening with resolve. The Xylar Council will be informed immediately. One of our people has been harmed by human military research conducted without proper disclosure. This constitutes a direct violation of the Aurora Accords. The Accords provide exceptions for classified research with mutual defense applications. Major Sloan countered. Your council representatives signed off on those provisions, under the assumption that all necessary safety measures would be in place. Tianvar retorted. Clearly, they were not. As the argument escalated, Nira felt a new wave of intensity building within her. The neural inhibitor was failing to contain the serum's effects as her Xylar physiology adapted and integrated the foreign compound. Her skin began to flush again, and the bioluminescent patterns reappeared, pulsing more rapidly. Something's wrong, she managed to gasp, drawing everyone's attention back to her. Dr. Thorne quickly checked the monitoring equipment. The inhibitor isn't working anymore, he said, alarm evident in his voice. Her system is metabolizing it too quickly. What does that mean? Major Sloan demanded. It means we need a more targeted approach, Dr. Thorne explained, already preparing another injection. Something specifically designed for Xylar biochemistry. Tianvar stepped forward. Let me help. I know her baseline biochemistry better than anyone here. As they worked to prepare a new treatment, Nira felt her consciousness beginning to fragment again. The sensation was different this time, less chaotic but more intense, as if her entire being was becoming hypersensitive to every stimulus in the environment. The touch of the sheet beneath her felt like electricity against her skin. The sound of voices resonated through her body like physical pressure. Even the air moving in and out of her lungs created waves of sensation that bordered on ecstasy. But alongside the physical experience, her mind remained analytical, the scientist in her observing and cataloging each new development, even as she experienced it. And what she observed disturbed her deeply. The combat serum wasn't simply a stimulant. Its effects suggested a far more sophisticated design, targeting specific neural pathways and biochemical responses. This wasn't just about enhancing human performance. It was about fundamentally altering emotional and psychological states to create more effective soldiers. As this realization crystallized in her mind, Nira made a decision. Whatever happened next, she needed to understand exactly what this serum was designed to do and why it was being developed in a supposedly collaborative research facility without the knowledge of all partners. With tremendous effort, she pushed herself up on one elbow, fixing Dr. Thorne with an intense gaze. What is this really for? She demanded, each word punctuated by a ragged breath. The question hung in the air, charged with accusation and the weight of potential diplomatic consequences. Before Dr. Thorne could formulate a response, the medical bay's alert system activated, bathing the room in pulsing red light. Security breach in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. All personnel implement containment protocols immediately. Major Sloane's hand went to her sidearm. What's happening? One of her security officers checked his communication device. Ma'am, we have reports of unauthorized access to the main database. Someone's trying to download the combat serum research files. Dr. Thorne paled. That's impossible. Those files are behind multiple security firewalls. Apparently not impossible enough, Major Sloan snapped. Lock down this facility. No one in or out until we identify the source of the breach. As they rushed to respond to the new crisis, Nira seized the moment of distraction. Despite her condition, she slid from the examination table, her legs nearly buckling beneath her as she fought to remain upright. The room tilted sickeningly around her, but she forced herself to focus, to put one foot in front of the other. Tienvar noticed her movement too late to stop her. Nira, no! You're in no condition! But she was already staggering toward the door, driven by a combination of the serum-induced arousal state and her own determination to escape the rapidly escalating confrontation. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to find somewhere quiet where she could process what was happening to her body and mind. The corridor outside the medical bay was eerily empty, the security alert having driven most staff to their designated safe areas. Nira leaned against the wall for support, each step sending new pulses of sensation through her hypersensitive nervous system. Behind her, she could hear voices calling her name, but they seemed distant and unimportant compared to the overwhelming input from her own body. She pushed forward, letting instinct guide her, as rational thought became increasingly difficult to maintain. Without fully realizing where she was headed, Nira found herself approaching the Ecological Dome, the facility's environmental research center, where specimens from dozens of worlds were cultivated in carefully controlled conditions. The dome was her favorite place in the facility, a green oasis amidst the sterile laboratory environments. The entry panel recognized her biometric signature despite her altered state, allowing her access to the humid, oxygen-rich environment beyond. As the doors sealed behind her, Nira took her first deep breath in what felt like hours, the botanical scents momentarily cutting through the haze of her condition. The dome stretched above her, a vast transparent structure filled with carefully arranged ecological zones. Artificial lighting mimicked various planetary conditions, while sophisticated climate control systems maintained distinct temperature and humidity levels in different sections. Nira stumbled forward, drawn to the central Xylar Botanical Garden, where familiar plants from her homeworld grew in carefully tended beds. Perhaps there, among the healing herbs and natural remedies of her people, she might find something to counteract the effects of the human military serum racing through her system. But as she approached the garden, a new warning light began to flash at the dome's perimeter. The laser-based containment system designed to prevent cross-contamination between ecological zones. In her disoriented state, Nira had triggered the sensors, and now the system was preparing to activate its quarantine protocols. The first beam of coherent light cut across her path, missing her by centimeters. Another flashed to her right, then her left, creating an increasingly complex pattern of light barriers intended to herd potentially contaminated individuals away from sensitive biological specimens. Nira froze, trapped between advancing laser barriers. Her serum-enhanced senses perceived the beams with extraordinary clarity, not just as lines of light, but as complex patterns of energy that seemed almost alive. The sight was mesmerizing, distracting her from the very real danger they represented. Nira! Tienvar's voice cut through her fascination. He stood at the dome entrance, unable to advance past the first barrier. Don't move! The containment system will adjust if you stay still. She turned toward his voice, the movement causing her to lose balance. As she stumbled sideways, her hand passed through one of the laser barriers. Pain lanced up her arm, shocking even through her heightened state, and she recoiled with a cry. The system, detecting movement, increased the density of the barrier pattern. Nira found herself in an ever-shrinking safe zone, the lasers closing in from all directions, like a tightening net. Override code Theta 97, Dr. Thorne shouted from beside Tienvar, frantically entering commands into the control panel. System, recognize authority. Thorne, Alan P., Research Director! The lasers flickered, but remained active. Override failed, an automated voice announced calmly. Biohazard containment protocol in effect. Please evacuate the ecological dome immediately. Naira's scientific training fought through the serum's effects, long enough for her to realize the danger she was in. The containment system was designed to neutralize biological contaminants, including, if necessary, living carriers. If she couldn't escape the laser grid, she might be subjected to sterilization protocols that would cause severe injury, or worse. Gathering what remained of her strength and coordination, she dropped to the ground and rolled beneath the lowest layer of beams, feeling their heat pass dangerously close to her skin. The maneuver brought her to the edge of the central water feature, a large pool where aquatic specimens from various worlds coexisted in a carefully balanced ecosystem. Without hesitation, Naira plunged into the water. The cool liquid was both shock and relief to her overheated system, the sensation so intense that she gasped, inadvertently inhaling a mouthful of the nutrient-rich solution. She surfaced, coughing and sputtering, to find that the laser system had deactivated, the water's surface creating too complex an environment for the containment protocols to function effectively. But as she treaded water, trying to orient herself, she realized she had created a new crisis. The pool contained dozens of delicate aquatic specimens, many of them used in pharmaceutical research. Her presence, and particularly her contaminated state, risked disrupting experiments that had been running for months or even years. Already, some of the more sensitive organisms were reacting to her presence, their bioluminescent patterns shifting in response to the chemical signals her body was releasing. The pool's monitoring systems began to flash warnings, detecting abnormal changes in the water's composition. Thienvar and Dr. Thorne had made their way around the perimeter of the dome, careful to avoid triggering the laser system themselves. They reached the edge of the pool, just as Naira began to haul herself out of the water. "Don't move," Dr. Thorne instructed, his voice tense but controlled. "The serum in your system appears to be interacting with the biological agents in the pool. We need to get you into isolation immediately." Naira looked down at her soaked clothing, now stained with phosphorescent streaks from the aquatic organisms. Her skin tingled where the water touched it, but the sensation was different from before, sharper, more focused, as if the biological compounds in the pool were somehow interacting with the serum to create new effects. "I can't," she began, but the words died in her throat as a new wave of sensation swept through her. This time, however, it wasn't pleasure or stimulation but pain, intense, radiating pain that started in her chest and spread outward to her limbs. She collapsed at the edge of the pool, her body convulsing as two incompatible biochemical systems waged war within her cells. The combat serum, designed for human physiology, was reacting catastrophically with both her xylar biology and the alien compounds from the pool. "She's going into full systemic shock," Thienvar said urgently, dropping to his knees beside her. "We need emergency intervention now." Dr. Thorne was already calling for backup. "Medical team to the ecological dome, priority Alpha, and bring the experimental counteragent from locker X7. Thienvar looked up sharply. "X7? What counteragent?" Dr. Thorne hesitated only briefly. "It's called Alpha X, a universal neutralizer we've been developing for exactly this kind of cross-species contamination event." "You developed a counteragent for a serum you claimed was safe?" Thienvar's voice was cold with accusation. "We develop counteragents for every compound we work with," Dr. Thorne replied defensively. "Standard safety protocol." Their argument was cut short as Naira's condition deteriorated further. Her skin was now cycling rapidly through colors, purple to pale blue to almost white, a dangerous sign in xylar physiology indicating severe autonomic distress. Her breathing had become shallow and irregular, and the bioluminescent patterns on her skin were fading, suggesting her body was shutting down non-essential systems to conserve energy. "She can't wait for the medical team," Thienvar said grimly. "We need to stabilize her now." Dr. Thorne nodded, reaching into his lab coat to withdraw a small case. Inside was a single auto-injector, labeled Alpha X Prototype, emergency use only. "This hasn't completed final testing," he admitted. "But it's designed to break down the molecular structure of the combat serum without harmful side effects." "Without harmful effects on humans," Thienvar corrected. "What about Xylars?" Dr. Thorne met his gaze directly. "Unknown. But without it, she'll die in minutes." Thienvar closed his eyes briefly, weighing the impossible choice, then nodded. "Do it." With practiced precision, Dr. Thorne pressed the injector against Nyra's neck, directly over the primary circulatory pathway that Xylars shared with humans. The device hissed as it delivered its contents. For several terrifying seconds, nothing happened. Nyra remained motionless, her skin continuing its alarming color fluctuations, her breathing becoming increasingly labored. Then, just as hope began to fade, her body arched upward, a small gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes flew open, glowing with an intense silver light that gradually faded to their normal green. The color fluctuations slowed, then stabilized at her natural lavender hue. "It's working," Dr. Thorne breathed, relief evident in his voice. "The Alpha X is neutralizing the serum." Thienvar wasn't ready to celebrate. "And the aquatic contaminants?" "The Alpha X should break those down as well," Dr. Thorne assured him. "It's designed to target foreign chemical compounds, regardless of origin." As if to confirm his assessment, Nyra's breathing began to regulate, and the tension in her muscles gradually relaxed. Her eyes, still open, lost their unfocused look and began to track movement again. "Nyra," Thienvar leaned closer. "Can you hear me?" She managed a weak nod, then whispered, "What happened?" Before either researcher could respond, the dome's entrance slid open to admit Major Sloan and her security team, followed closely by a UIC medical unit and several senior Xylar representatives who had evidently been summoned by Thienvar before he followed Nyra to the dome. Among them was Councillor Jacquin, a high-ranking member of the Xylar delegation to the UIC. His presence transformed the medical emergency into a diplomatic incident. "What exactly has occurred here?" Jacquin demanded, his formal speech patterns emphasizing the gravity of the situation. "We received reports of a Xylar researcher exposed to unauthorized human military compounds." Major Sloan stepped forward, clearly attempting to control the narrative. "Counselor, there's been an unfortunate laboratory accident. We're still investigating the details, but I assure you that appropriate medical care has been provided. An accident involving classified human military research conducted without full disclosure to your Xylar partners." Thienvar interjected. "Research that nearly cost Nyra her life." Dr. Thorne winced at the blunt assessment, but didn't contradict it. Instead, he focused on the immediate medical needs. "She's stabilized, but needs comprehensive care. Can we continue this discussion after we've transferred her to the medical facility?" For once, all parties agreed. As the medical team carefully lifted Nyra onto a hovering stretcher, she caught Dr. Thorne's eye, holding his gaze with unexpected intensity given her weakened state. "Why?" she asked simply, the single word carrying the weight of accusation, curiosity, and scientific inquiry all at once. Dr. Thorne had no answer to give her, at least, not one he was willing to share in front of UIC military personnel and Xylar officials. Instead, he merely placed a hand briefly on her shoulder before stepping back to allow the medical team to transport her. As they moved through the facility toward the advanced medical wing, Nyra drifted in and out of consciousness. The overwhelming sensations had subsided, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and lingering echoes of the serum's effects. Phantom tingles and occasional flashes of the heightened awareness she had experienced. Despite her condition, her scientist mind continued to work, analyzing what had happened to her. The combat serum had affected her in ways that suggested it wasn't designed solely for enhanced combat performance. The specific pattern of arousal, the targeting of emotional centers, these pointed to a more sophisticated purpose than merely creating stronger soldiers. As darkness claimed her once more, Nira made a silent promise to herself. When she recovered, she would uncover the truth about the serum and ensure that such dangerous research couldn't threaten the delicate peace between humans and Xylars again. Little did she know that her accidental exposure had already set in motion events that would shake the foundations of the United Interplanetary Consortium and forever change the course of human-Xylar relations. 3 days later, Nira awoke in the specialized recovery unit of the Xylar Medical Facility. The room was dimly lit and filled with the gentle sounds of her homeworld: rustling leaves, distant chimes, the soft gurgle of flowing water, all carefully designed to create a healing environment for Xylar patients. Her body felt leaden. Each limb weighted as if gravity had doubled overnight. The vibrant sensitivity that had overwhelmed her senses during the serum exposure was gone, replaced by a dull numbness that made even the simple act of opening her eyes require conscious effort. "She's awake," a familiar voice announced, Tienvar, who must have been sitting vigil nearby. A moment later, his face appeared in her field of vision, concern evident in his expression. "How do you feel?" Nira considered the question carefully before responding. "Heavy," she finally decided. "And muted, like everything is wrapped in layers of fabric." Tienvar nodded, unsurprised. "That's the after effect of the Alpha X compound. It doesn't just neutralize the combat serum. It temporarily dampens neural response to prevent rebound effects. The sensation should fade over the next cycle or two." With his assistance, Nira managed to sit up, taking in her surroundings more fully. The recovery room was private and equipped with advanced monitoring technology, suggesting her condition had warranted special attention. "How long have I been here?" she asked, noting the growth of crystalline flowers in a nearby arrangement, a type that took at least 3 days to bloom from bud stage. "This is the 3rd day," Tienvar confirmed. "You've been mostly unconscious, though you had periods of semi-awareness during which the medical team conducted assessments." Nira frowned, trying to remember these evaluations but finding only hazy impressions. "I don't recall much after the ecological dome." "That's not surprising. The combination of the combat serum, the aquatic contaminants, and the Alpha X created quite a neurochemical storm in your system." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "We were concerned about potential lasting damage to your neural pathways. But the latest scans are encouraging. Your Xylar regenerative capabilities appear to be restoring normal function." The gravity of how close she had come to permanent harm settled over Nira like a cold shadow. "And what's happening outside this room? With the facility, the research, the UIC officials?" Tienvar's expression tightened. "There have been developments. The Xylar Council has filed a formal protest with UIC Command regarding the undisclosed military research. The Combat Serum Project has been suspended pending a full ethical review, and Dr. Thorne has been placed on administrative leave while an investigation is conducted." "That seems extreme for what was ultimately my mistake," Nira said, guilt coloring her voice. "I shouldn't have entered the storage room or touched anything inside." "The issue isn't your actions," Tienvar corrected firmly. "It's the fact that potentially dangerous military compounds were being stored in an inadequately secured location within a supposedly collaborative research facility. And more importantly, that research with clear military applications was being conducted without full disclosure to all participating species." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to ensure privacy despite the room's secure status. What you experienced wasn't supposed to be possible. Nira. The combat serum was allegedly in early testing phases. Safe, controlled, limited in effect. What happened to you suggests it was far more advanced, more potent than officially acknowledged. Nira considered this, memories of the overwhelming sensations flickering through her mind. It was incredibly powerful, she admitted. Not just physically stimulating, but emotionally and mentally as well. It felt like every part of me was operating at maximum intensity simultaneously. Exactly. Tienvar nodded grimly. A response far beyond what should have been possible with a Phase 1 trial compound. The question is, what were they really developing, and why keep it secret from their Xylar partners? Before Nira could respond, the door to her recovery room slid open to admit a medical technician. The interruption ended their confidential discussion, but the questions remained, circling in Nira's mind as the technician conducted a series of standard evaluations. After confirming that her vital signs were continuing to normalize, the technician left them alone once more. Nira used the opportunity to ask the question that had been forming since she awoke. Has anyone examined exactly what the serum was designed to do? Not just its official purpose, but its actual mechanism of action. Tienvar hesitated. There's been limited access to the research data. The UIC is citing security protocols to restrict information sharing, even with the investigation underway. Nira felt a surge of frustration cut through her post-serum lethargy. That's convenient for them. Keep everything classified. Admit no wrongdoing. Wait for the diplomatic pressure to subside. Perhaps, Tienvar acknowledged. But there may be another avenue of investigation. He glanced toward the door to ensure they remained alone, then continued. You have something no one else has. Direct experience with the serum's effects on Xylar physiology. If you can document your experience in detail, from a scientific perspective, I could provide evidence that can't be classified away. Nira finished, understanding immediately. A first-hand account of the serum's effects that would be admissible in any UIC ethics inquiry? Precisely. Tienvar looked pleased at her quick grasp of the strategy. And as your recovery progresses, we could potentially conduct controlled tests to identify any lingering traces of the compound in your system. The idea was both scientifically sound and potentially risky. Becoming the center of an interspecies controversy wasn't what Nira had envisioned for her research career. And yet, the alternative, allowing the truth to be buried beneath layers of classification and diplomatic maneuvering, was unacceptable to her scientific integrity. I'll do it, she decided. I'll document everything I can remember, every sensation, every response, and I'll submit to whatever testing might help identify the serum's true nature. Tienvar nodded approvingly. I expected nothing less from you. Even as an intern, your commitment to scientific truth has been exemplary. Over the next several days, as her strength gradually returned, Nira dedicated herself to creating a comprehensive record of her experience. Using a secure Xylar data tablet, she documented everything from the initial accident to the final moments before losing consciousness in the ecological dome. The process was challenging, forcing her to revisit sensations and reactions that remained disturbing even in memory. The serum had created a state of arousal so intense it bordered on painful, a total system response that went far beyond normal stimulant effects. Most concerning were the emotional and cognitive aspects. The serum hadn't simply accelerated her heart rate or heightened her physical sensitivity. It had created a state of hyper-emotional awareness, intensifying every feeling while simultaneously reducing inhibitions against acting on those feelings. In a combat situation, such effects would be devastating, creating soldiers who felt no fear, no hesitation, only an overwhelming drive to engage and overcome any obstacle. But the implications went beyond warfare. a compound capable of such profound manipulation of emotional states, had potential applications in everything, from interrogation to population control. As she compiled her documentation, Neera found herself experiencing occasional echoes of the serum's effects, brief moments when her senses would suddenly sharpen, or her emotional responses would intensify beyond normal parameters. These episodes were fleeting, lasting only seconds before subsiding, but they suggested the possibility that the serum had created lasting changes in her neurochemistry. She included these incidents in her report, noting their frequency, duration, and specific manifestations. If the serum had indeed caused permanent alterations to her system, that information would be crucial to any investigation of its safety and ethical implications. On the seventh day of her recovery, Neera received an unexpected visitor, Dr. Leon Mora, the human biochemist who had first found her in distress after the exposure, arrived carrying a small case of equipment and an expression of genuine concern. "May I come in?" she asked, hesitating at the threshold of the recovery room. Neera nodded, curious about this visit from one of the few humans who had shown consistent kindness toward the Xylar research staff. "I wanted to see how you were recovering," Dr. Mora explained, setting down her case, "and to offer my assistance with your documentation project. Tienvar mentioned you were creating a detailed account of your experience." Neera studied the human researcher carefully. "Isn't that contrary to UIC restrictions on information sharing?" Dr. Mora's expression hardened slightly. "Some of us believe scientific ethics transcend military classification. What happened to you was wrong on multiple levels, and I want to help ensure it doesn't happen again, to anyone of any species." Her sincerity was convincing, and Neera found herself willing to accept the offered alliance. "What kind of assistance did you have in mind?" In response, Dr. Mora opened her case to reveal specialized scanning equipment, more advanced than the standard medical monitors Neera had been using. "This is a molecular tracer," she explained. "It can identify and map specific compound signatures in biological systems, even after the primary effects have subsided. With your permission, I'd like to scan you to look for residual markers of the combat serum." "Why would that be helpful if the Alpha X neutralized the serum?" Neera asked. "The Alpha X breaks down the active components, but like most compounds, the serum leaves behind metabolic byproducts," Dr. Mora explained. "Those byproducts can tell us a great deal about the serum's composition and mechanism of action, information that might not be included in the official research files." The offer was too valuable to refuse. Neera agreed, submitting to a series of non-invasive scans that took the better part of an hour to complete. As Dr. Mora worked, she explained her own involvement with the research facility. "I came to Aurora Labs because I believed in the mission of collaborative research," she said, adjusting the scanner's settings. "My specialty is cross-species pharmaceutical compatibility, developing medications that can be safely used by multiple intelligent species despite significant biological differences." "A noble goal," Neera acknowledged, "but one that seems at odds with the development of species-specific military compounds." Dr. Mora's expression clouded. "Many of us in the human research community were unaware of the full scope of the combat serum project. We were told it was a performance enhancer with potential emergency medical applications, something to help stabilize critically injured individuals until they could receive proper treatment." "And you believe that?" Neera couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "I had no reason not to," Dr. Mora replied evenly. "Until your exposure demonstrated effects far beyond anything that had been officially documented." She paused, then added more quietly, "Some of us have begun to question what else might be happening within the facility without our knowledge." As the scanning process concluded, Dr. Mora transferred the results to Neera's data tablet. "I've included an analysis algorithm that will help you interpret the molecular signatures," she explained. It should provide scientific support for your subjective account of the serum's effects. Before leaving, Dr. Mora hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Dr. Thorne may be officially on administrative leave, but he still has supporters within UIC command. The investigation is facing obstacles, political pressure. Your documentation may be more important than you realize." With that warning, she departed, leaving Neera to consider the wider implications of her role in the unfolding situation. What had begun as a personal medical crisis was expanding into something with potential diplomatic and military consequences that extended far beyond Aurora Labs. That evening, as Neera reviewed the molecular scan results, she discovered something unexpected. Among the metabolic byproducts of the combat serum was a compound that shouldn't have been there, a synthetic protein sequence specifically designed to bind to certain neuroreceptors found only in Xylar physiology. The implications were stunning. The combat serum hadn't merely affected her differently because of natural biological variations between humans and Xylars. It had contained components specifically engineered to interact with Xylar biology, components that had no legitimate place in a human enhancement formula. This wasn't an accident or an unfortunate side effect. The serum had been deliberately designed with the capability to affect Xylars in specific, predictable ways. Neera sat motionless, the data tablet forgotten in her lap as the full implications washed over her. This wasn't just about military secrecy or ethical research violations. This was something far more sinister: the covert development of a compound that could potentially be used as a biochemical weapon against her species. The question was, what should she do with this discovery? The diplomatic situation was already precarious. Revealing evidence of what could be interpreted as preparation for biological warfare might shatter the fragile peace between humans and Xylars entirely. And yet, concealing such information would make her complicit in whatever was being planned. Her scientific integrity and her loyalty to her own people demanded that the truth be revealed, regardless of the consequences. With trembling fingers, Neera encrypted the scan results and her analysis, then sent them directly to Counselor Jacquin with a request for an immediate, confidential meeting. Whatever happened next, she was committed to seeing this through to its conclusion. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential danger and diplomatic landmines. But one thing was clear: her accidental exposure to the combat serum had revealed a truth that might otherwise have remained hidden until it was too late. As night fell over the medical facility, Neera found herself standing at the window, gazing up at the violet sky of Zenta 9. The twin suns had set, leaving only the crystalline stars and the faint phosphorescent glow of the planet's rings to illuminate the darkness. Despite the lingering weakness in her body, she felt a new strength taking root within her, a determination born of her ordeal and the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. Whatever the combat serum had been intended to do, her exposure to it had transformed her in ways that went beyond biochemistry. She was no longer just an intern, no longer just a junior researcher finding her way in the scientific community. She had become something more: a witness, an advocate, and perhaps, though she didn't yet realize it, a catalyst for change in the complex relationship between two vastly different species, trying to find their way forward together among the stars. 2 weeks after her exposure to the combat serum, Neera stood before the joint UIC-Xylar Ethics Committee, her slender form dwarfed by the imposing chamber, but her presence commanding nonetheless. The evidence she had compiled, her detailed account of the serum's effects, the molecular scan results provided by Dr. Mora, and the subsequent analysis revealing Xylar-specific compounds, had forced UIC Command to expand the investigation beyond an internal review. The committee chamber, located in the neutral consortium tower that served as headquarters for interspecies governance, was designed to accommodate representatives from all member species. Today, however, only humans and Xylars occupied the curved benches, the tension between them palpable in the sterile air. Research intern Nira began the Human Committee chair, a silver-haired diplomat named Ambassador Thornton. You have submitted serious allegations regarding the nature and purpose of the Combat Serum project. Before we proceed, I must emphasize that many of the technical details of this research remain classified for legitimate security reasons. With respect, Ambassador, Nira responded, her voice steady despite her nervousness. My own body was exposed to this supposedly classified research without my consent. I believe that grants me standing to discuss its effects without restriction. A murmur of approval rippled through the Xylar representatives, while several Human Committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Furthermore, she continued, gaining confidence, the molecular evidence indicates components specifically designed to interact with Xylar physiology, components that have no legitimate place in a human enhancement formula. This suggests research aims far beyond those officially acknowledged. Ambassador Thornton's expression remained carefully neutral. Dr. Thorne, as the lead researcher on the Combat Serum project, would you care to respond to these allegations? Dr. Thorne rose from his seat among the human delegation. The past 2 weeks had left their mark on him. His face was drawn, with new lines etched around his eyes and mouth. Yet he still carried himself with the authority of a senior scientist as he approached the speaker's podium. The Combat Serum project was initiated with legitimate research goals, he began, his voice echoing in the chamber. Its primary purpose was to develop compounds that could enhance human performance in emergency situations, natural disasters, space accidents, extreme environments where normal human capabilities might be insufficient. He paused, glancing briefly at Nira before continuing. However, I acknowledge that as the project progressed, there was pressure from certain elements within UIC Command to explore military applications. This included examining how the serum might affect non-human species encountered in potential conflict situations. This admission caused an uproar among the Xylar delegation. Councillor Jacquin rose to his feet, his formal demeanor giving way to righteous anger. You deliberately developed a compound capable of incapacitating Xylars through biochemical manipulation? This constitutes preparation for biological warfare, a direct violation of the Aurora Accords. Not incapacitation, Dr. Thorne corrected quickly. The Xylar-specific components were designed to create a temporary state of compliance, a non-lethal alternative to conventional weapons that could potentially save lives in conflict situations. Compliance through forced arousal? Nira stepped forward, unable to contain her outrage. I experienced this compliance firsthand. Dr. Thorne, it wasn't merely physical stimulation. It was a total override of normal cognitive and emotional function, a biochemical assault on individual autonomy. Her words hung in the air, damning in their simplicity. Several Human Committee members looked distinctly uncomfortable, while the Xylar representatives radiated collective anger so intense it manifested as subtle, bioluminescent patterns across their skin. I did not personally authorize the inclusion of Xylar-specific compounds, Dr. Thorne said after a moment, his voice lower. Those additions were made at the insistence of military advisors attached to the project. I objected on ethical grounds, but was overruled. Yet you continued to lead the research, Nira pointed out. I did. Dr. Thorne met her gaze directly. Because I believed that by remaining involved, I could ensure the development of effective countermeasures like the Alpha X compound that saved your life. Had I resigned, those ethical guardrails might have been removed entirely. His justification, while logical, did little to mitigate the fundamental betrayal of trust that had occurred. The committee discussion continued for hours, delving into the technical details of the serum's composition, the authorization chain that had approved its development, and the broader implications for human-Xylar relations. Throughout the proceedings, Nira maintained a composed exterior, presenting her evidence with scientific precision, despite the deeply personal nature of her experience. Her testimony, combined with the molecular data and supplementary evidence provided by Dr. Mora and other sympathetic human researchers, painted a compelling picture of ethical violations that could not be dismissed. As the session neared its conclusion, Ambassador Thornton addressed Nira directly. "Your courage in bringing this matter forward is acknowledged. Research intern Nira, the committee will now deliberate on appropriate actions regarding both the Combat Serum project and the broader questions of research oversight raised by this incident." The formal language couldn't mask the significance of the moment. Regardless of the committee's eventual findings, Nira had forced a reckoning that might otherwise have been avoided. A public examination of practices that had been hidden behind classification and security protocols. As she left the chamber, physically exhausted but morally vindicated, Nira found Thienvar waiting for her in the antechamber. His expression was a mixture of pride and concern. "You did well," he said simply. "Better than well. You spoke truth to power with the clarity of a seasoned diplomat and the precision of a master scientist." "I only reported what I experienced and what the evidence showed," Nira replied modestly, though his praise warmed her. "Sometimes that is the most radical act possible." Thienvar gestured toward a quiet alcove where they could speak privately. "The committee's deliberations may take days, but certain outcomes are already becoming clear. The Combat Serum project will be terminated, and new oversight protocols will be implemented for all cross-species research." "Will it be enough?" Nira asked, voicing the concern that had haunted her throughout the proceedings. "Words on paper, new committees, revised protocols. These things can be circumvented by those determined enough to do so." "Perhaps," Thienvar acknowledged, "but awareness has been raised. Both species will be more vigilant moving forward, and individuals like Dr. Mora have demonstrated that ethical concerns can transcend species loyalty." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. The Xylar Council has taken note of your actions. They're impressed by your courage and scientific rigor in documenting your experience. There's talk of offering you a position with the Interspecies Bioethics Initiative once you've completed your recovery." The news took Nira by surprise. The Interspecies Bioethics Initiative was a prestigious organization that shaped policy across the United Interplanetary Consortium, far beyond the scope of a single research facility, like Aurora Labs. "I'm still just an intern," she protested. "I don't have the experience or credentials for such a position." "You have something more valuable," Thienvar countered. "Direct experience with the consequences of ethical failures in cross-species research, combined with a scientific background to analyze those failures and propose meaningful solutions." As they spoke, Nira became aware of an approaching figure, Dr. Thorne, making his way toward them with deliberate steps. Thienvar tensed, moving slightly in front of Nira in a protective gesture that wasn't lost on either of them. "May I speak with you?" Dr. Thorne asked, addressing Nira directly. "Privately, if possible." Thienvar began to object, but Nira placed a restraining hand on his arm. "It's all right," she assured him. "I'll hear what he has to say." Reluctantly, Thienvar withdrew to a respectful distance, though he remained within sight, his concern evident in his posture. "Your testimony was compelling," Dr. Thorne began once they were alone. "And accurate. I want you to know that I never intended for the serum to be used as you described." "Intentions matter less than actions," Nira replied, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. "And the action of developing a compound capable of biochemical manipulation of my species speaks for itself." Dr. Thorne nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right, of course. I allowed myself to be guided by scientific curiosity and professional ambition rather than ethical considerations. That failure will haunt me for the remainder of my career, as it should. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small data crystal, which he offered to Neera. This contains my complete research notes on the combat serum, including all the material that was classified. I'm giving it to you because I believe you'll use the information responsibly to develop safeguards rather than weapons. Neera hesitated, then accepted the crystal, understanding the significance of the gesture. Why now? Why not bring this information to the committee? Politics, Dr. Thorne said simply. Some elements within UIC Command would prefer certain aspects of the research remain buried. The committee will receive a sanitized version that acknowledges wrongdoing, but omits technical details that could be misused. He glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then continued in a lower voice. The truth is, the Combat Serum Project was just one branch of a larger initiative exploring biochemical methods of interspecies control. There are other projects, other researchers, working on similar compounds targeting different species within the consortium. The revelation sent a chill through Neera. You're suggesting a systematic effort to develop biochemical weapons against consortium member species. That would violate every principle of the Alliance. Not weapons, exactly, Dr. Thorne clarified. More like insurance policies, ways to neutralize potential threats without resorting to conventional warfare. He sighed heavily. Humanity's history is filled with examples of technological advancement outpacing ethical development. We build the capability first, then struggle to determine if and how it should be used. And you're entrusting me with this information? Neera asked, still uncertain of his motives. I'm entrusting it to someone who has demonstrated both scientific understanding and ethical clarity, Dr. Thorne replied. What you do with it is your choice, but I believe you'll use it to protect rather than harm, to ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to others. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Neera holding the data crystal that contained information potentially explosive enough to reshape the political landscape of the United Interplanetary Consortium. Tianvar rejoined her, eyeing the crystal curiously. What did he give you? A responsibility, Neera answered quietly, and perhaps a path forward. In the days that followed, as she recovered her strength and prepared for whatever role awaited her in the aftermath of the committee's decision, Neera found herself experiencing continued echoes of the serum's effects. These episodes were becoming less frequent, but remained unsettling. Brief moments when her senses would sharpen unexpectedly, or her emotional responses would intensify beyond normal parameters. Dr. Mora, who had continued to monitor her recovery, confirmed what Neera had begun to suspect. The combat serum had created subtle but permanent changes in her neurochemistry. The alterations weren't dangerous or debilitating, but they had effectively enhanced certain aspects of her natural Xylar abilities, particularly her already sophisticated emotional intelligence and sensory perception. You'll likely experience intermittent, heightened states throughout your life, Dr. Mora explained during one of their sessions. Think of it as having occasionally enhanced senses, rather than as episodes of dysfunction. With time and practice, you may even learn to control when these states occur. The idea was simultaneously frightening and fascinating, a permanent reminder of her exposure, but also potentially a unique advantage in her future work. If she could indeed learn to control these episodes, the enhanced perception might prove valuable in navigating the complex ethical landscapes of interspecies relations. 1 month after her testimony before the Ethics Committee, Neera received formal notification of their findings and recommendations. As Tianvar had predicted, the Combat Serum Project was officially terminated, and all related research materials were ordered destroyed, though Neera knew from Dr. Thorne's data crystal that the most sensitive information had already been removed from official records. More significantly, The committee had recommended a complete restructuring of research oversight within the consortium, with new requirements for multi-species review panels to evaluate all projects with potential cross-species applications. These changes, while perhaps insufficient to prevent all future ethical violations, represented a meaningful step toward greater transparency and accountability. The notification also included a personal addendum, an offer to join the Interspecies Bioethics Initiative as a special advisor on research ethics and cross-species pharmaceutical development. The position would allow her to complete her formal education while simultaneously contributing her unique perspective to policy development. As Nira considered the offer, sitting in the small garden attached to the recovery facility where she had spent the past month, she found herself experiencing one of the serum-induced episodes of heightened awareness. Colors became more vivid, sounds more distinct, and emotions, both her own and those of the people around her, more clearly perceptible. In this enhanced state, the path forward seemed suddenly, crystallinely clear. She would accept the position with the Bioethics Initiative, using her experience and the information Dr. Thorne had provided to help develop safeguards against similar research abuses. She would advocate for greater transparency in cross-species research while working to bridge the cultural and biological differences that sometimes created barriers to true understanding. And perhaps most importantly, she would serve as a living reminder of both the dangers and possibilities inherent in the quest for knowledge, a testament to the fact that scientific advancement without ethical guidance could cause profound harm, but also that even from the darkest experiences, positive change could emerge. As the heightened state gradually subsided, Nira's resolve remained. What had begun as an accidental exposure, a terrifying loss of control, had transformed into a calling. The combat serum had changed her, but not in the way its creators had intended. Instead of making her vulnerable to manipulation, it had awakened in her a deeper understanding of the connections between biology, emotion, and ethics, connections that would guide her work in the years to come. The violet sky of Zenta 9 stretched above her, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the countless species that called it home. Somewhere, among those distant stars, humanity and Xylars and a dozen other intelligent species were working to build a future together, a future that would require vigilance, understanding, and individuals willing to stand for ethical principles, even when doing so came at personal cost. Nira had not chosen this path. It had chosen her through a moment of chance and carelessness. But now, looking toward that uncertain future with newly clarified vision, she embraced the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. Whatever challenges lay ahead in the complex dance of interspecies relations, she was ready to face them, forever changed, but ultimately strengthened by the very experience that had nearly destroyed her. As she rose to return to her quarters and compose her acceptance of the Bioethics Initiative position, Nira felt a sense of purpose that transcended the lingering effects of the serum. The accidental exposure had awakened something in her that had always been there, waiting for the right catalyst to bring it to the surface, a determination to ensure that the power of science would be guided by the wisdom of compassion, regardless of what species wielded that power. And in that determination, she found a kind of peace, not despite her ordeal, but because of it.